Welcome back to Tony Katz Today. I am your guest host, Kira Davis, editor-at-large for RedState.com, and we've been having a blast. I can't believe we are winding down, but I've got a great guest for this half hour because I want to talk about the economy and what's going on out there with jobs, and what's happened to small business this past year is horrific. And I've got the perfect guest to talk about this, my friend Carol Roth. She is a recovering investment banker. She's an entrepreneur. She's a TV pundit, host, but most importantly, she's the author of a new book, which you're going to want to go get, I promise. It's The War on Small Business. And she is also a proponent of big hair, which I love about her. Carol, welcome to Tony Katz Today. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Kira. All about small business, small government, and big hair. It's a good combination.
Amen to that. So tell us, because your book really it really does encompass the tragedy of what has happened to small business over this past year, while huge corporations like Amazon, Target, Walmart, Costco have been able to thrive with the government's help. And we talked about this on my podcast recently, and you mentioned something that I thought was very clever. I'd not heard anyone say this before. You said basically what has happened to small businesses in this past year is that they've been eminent domained out of their businesses.
Yeah, they've been eminent domained out of their business, except for that important part of eminent domain, which is the compensation. If you have property, the government is not supposed to take it for the public good, but that's exactly what happened during COVID. They said to, by the way, not all businesses, just some businesses that they decided what they deemed non-essential, by the way, not based on science, but based on who had political clout and connections to the government, that we are going to shut you down in whole or in part, and that is going to be our mandate for the public good. But they didn't do the opposite side of the eminent domain, the part that goes along with it, which is the appropriate compensation. And in fact, many small businesses have gotten nothing. Some have gotten crumbs from PPP, although there's stories all over the board about how that's worked and how that hasn't worked, but nowhere near the appropriate level of compensation. And if they had been proactive and done that from the beginning, if they really wanted to save small businesses and the jobs that went along with it, if they were also considered too important to fail, like the banks were deemed too big to fail instead of too small to matter, they would have done that up front, and they would have done it at a fraction of the cost of what they ultimately spent on all of their cronies.
Yeah, so in the meantime, Jeff Bezos increases, what did the value of Amazon go up by this past year? Do you know that?
So there were seven tech stocks in 2020 at the same time that hundreds of thousands of small businesses closed, millions more were struggling to survive, people were on unemployment at record levels. You would think that this would be terrible for the stock market, but that's not what happened. The Fed and the government propped up the stock market. So you had 7 companies that gained $3.4 trillion in value just during 2020, and it was a record year for things like initial public offerings as well as SPACs, which are these vehicles that you can use to raise money and go out and buy companies. So the capital markets were on fire. They were through the roof while Main Street was struggling. And that is a big issue and why capitalism has been bastardized to the point that people are really frustrated and starting to fight back. The problem is they're actually blaming it on capitalism instead of the bastardization of the free markets.
Which would be crony capitalism, right? And as a result, I just read yesterday, Carol, that Jeff Bezos is going to space. So he's going to space. Someone
else made this joke, so this isn't mine, but I saw somebody say, well, I guess anything to avoid paying taxes, which I thought was kind of funny. Not entirely true, but kind of funny nonetheless. But yeah, in fact, it's funny that you mentioned the word crony capitalism. I won't even use that. I call it cronyism because there is no space for cronies in true capitalism. And unfortunately, that conflation is why we get people angry at free markets instead of directing their anger at the government and at these cronies where it should be.
Right. I mean, I find it infuriating that, I'm reading this story about Bezos going to space, and I'm thinking, I would love to, honest to God, I would love to go to space. I would not say no if I had the opportunity. So I love that he's living the American dream, but it stings because I'm looking around my neighborhood, Carol, and half of the businesses are closed. And I live in a very, like, a posh area of California. I'm very blessed to live in a nice suburban area. People here are well off. People here do well for themselves. And even here could not survive what was done to them by their own governments the last year. So Jeff Bezos gets to go to space, and my neighbors are now in debt up to their noses for the rest of their lives because the business they poured everything into was forcibly closed by the hand of government. I mean, it is an injustice that I feel is almost intolerable.
Yeah, I mean, it's really frustrating. And, Jeff Bezos, I can't blame Jeff Bezos other than I don't really want to go to space. I'll just go to SPA, which is the spa, instead. But you can't blame him, because if somebody's offering you the opportunity to stay open while your competitor is closed and you're the beneficiary of that, yeah, sure, of course you're gonna take that. But the fact that is that it's the government that's at issue here. If they, by the way, they would have shut down Jeff Bezos, if they would have told their warehouse that they couldn't be open, if they had told all these big businesses that they could not open and that they were not considered essential, if everybody truly was all in this together, this entire shutdown would have lasted maybe 2 or 3 weeks at most. If Wall Street would have felt the same kind of pain that the small businesses were feeling, they would have been jumping up and down and saying, enough's enough, 2 or 3 weeks. But the fact of the matter is that the small businesses were either too small to matter or too hard to control, and they don't have the political clout, and so they were the cannon fodder. And unfortunately, while last year really brought this to light, I mean, it was really obvious, this kind of thing has been going on with the little guys, whether it's the retail investor in Wall Street, whether it's small business versus big business. If you're not inside, if you're not in the inner club, then you're not getting that opportunity to compete fairly under free market capitalism, and that's the part where we should all come together.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about the book, The War on Small Business, and tell me, do you have any, first of all, tell us, what a reader can expect to find in this book, and then tell us, do you have any ideas of what small business can do to protect themselves moving forward or fight for their own interests moving forward?
Yeah. So, I was very fortunate. I was approached early on during the pandemic to kind of give an economic take on what was going on. And from the beginning, it was very clear that small businesses were going to get the short end of the stick. They were amongst the first to be shut down. They weren't given the appropriate compensation. The CARES Act funding, which, was signed into law in early March of last year and then came out in April and whatnot, which included PPP as part of that, was highly slanted in favor of cronies, with just a tiny fraction of that going to small businesses. And by the way, in the first tranche, a lot of that went to big businesses posing as small businesses and not the most vulnerable based on the poor structure of it, which I think was intentional. So it was clear that was a big story. But I wanted to kind of take a step back and say, well, how did we get here? How did we get to the point where the number one risk for a small business becomes the U.S. government? And what I uncovered was really a larger story about this ongoing battle between decentralization, which is things like small business and cryptocurrency and the gig economy and people doing things independently and freely in economic freedom, and central planning. And what has happened over really the past 20-plus years is that we have exported capitalism to the benefit of those that we've exported it to, like China, for example. We have imported central planning, and we have had less and less freedom. And, of course, that is to the benefit of the central planners, that's to the benefit of their cronies, the big businesses, the special interests. But the everyday American, Main Street, those are the people who are getting left out. And if you're competing fairly and you're getting left out, that's one thing. But if you've got somebody who is rigging the game in favor of other people, that's not okay. And so the war on small business is really what happened last year, kind of opening up to talk about all of these other issues, whether it's the Federal Reserve, China, kind of the role of government and all those kinds of things.
Carol, tell everybody where they can find this book. It's not published yet, but it's about to come out, so people can pre-order this book.
Yes, so you can pre-order it now wherever fine books are sold, and I'm a capitalist, so I will let you choose. However, since we are trying to support small business, and capitalism is about spending your dollars and voting with your wallet, if you want to support a small business in doing so, if you go to bookshop.org, they will actually fulfill your book from a local independent small business, so it becomes a win-win for small business advocacy.
I love it. I'm so glad that you wrote this book. I'm so glad that there's a voice out there for the little guy, for small business, because as you always point out to me, Carol, whenever I talk to you, small business is America. I mean, small business makes up like 86% of American business. Am I correct?
99.9% of all businesses in America and the world are small businesses. Before COVID, it was 30.2 million.
Wow. See, we don't realize the power we have in our numbers.
Backbone of the economy.
We are the people, yes. Well, thank you so much, Carol. Go buy her book. It's called The War on Small Business. Thank you, Carol Roth. And we will be back on the other side of this break. I'm Kira Davis filling in for Tony Katz, and this is Tony Katz Today.